Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched the sunrise over the crystal city of Veltara. The morning light made the tall spires shine like diamonds against the purple sky. He had been on the Zephyrian homeworld for 6 months now as part of the Earth Defense Corps' cultural exchange program. The assignment was supposed to be easy, learn about alien culture and help build bridges between humans and the peaceful, crystal-skinned people who lived here. The Zephyrians were nothing like the aggressive aliens from the old movies back on Earth. They were gentle beings who looked like humans but had skin that sparkled with tiny crystals. Their voices sounded like wind chimes when they spoke. They had incredible healing powers and used their technology to help sick people from many different worlds. Jake liked working with them even though he sometimes felt useless since there was no real military work to do. That morning started like any other. Jake was drinking his coffee and reading reports when the first explosions shook the building. The peaceful crystal city suddenly filled with smoke and fire. Ships with sharp black designs swooped down from the sky like angry birds. Jake had never seen ships like these before, but he knew trouble when he saw it. "Korthek attack! Korthek attack!" The voice came through his communicator in broken English. Jake grabbed his weapon and ran outside. The scene was chaos. The black ships were firing red beams at everything that moved. Buildings crumbled and crystal fragments scattered everywhere like deadly rain. The Korthek were a warrior race that Jake had only heard about in briefings. They were tall gray beings with sharp teeth and red eyes who believed that might made right. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they could not use. Jake had never expected them to attack the peaceful Zephyrians. He ran toward the royal palace where he knew the Zephyrian leaders would need help. The streets were full of panicking people. Their crystal skin was dim with fear instead of the usual bright glow. Many were injured and bleeding a silver liquid that Jake realized was their blood. At the palace, Jake found Captain Ben Rogers, his commanding officer, trying to organize a defense with the few human soldiers stationed there. "Morrison, thank God you are here." The Korthek came out of nowhere. "They want the royal family, especially the princess. We need to get everyone to the evacuation ships." Jake nodded and joined the other soldiers who were helping Zephyrian guards move the royal family to safety. That was when he first saw Princess Lyra Veltar. She was young, maybe equivalent to a human teenager, with bright blue crystal skin that sparkled even in the dim emergency lights. Her large purple eyes were wide with fear as explosions shook the palace around them. Queen Vera Veltar, the princess's mother, was trying to stay calm, but Jake could see the worry in her musical voice as she spoke to her daughter in their language. The queen's crystal crown caught the light as she turned her head, looking for escape routes. "The transport ships are ready," called Lieutenant Sue Parker, another human soldier. "But we need to move fast. The Korthek are breaking through the outer defenses." The group began moving through the palace corridors toward the landing pad. Jake stayed near the back, watching for threats. The sound of fighting was getting closer. Suddenly, a wall exploded inward and Korthek soldiers poured through. They were even more frightening in person, 8 feet tall with gray skin like stone, and weapons that glowed with deadly energy. "Run!" Captain Rogers shouted. Everyone scattered in different directions. Jake saw the queen grab her daughter's hand, but another explosion knocked them apart. In the confusion of smoke and falling debris, the princess fell to the ground, separated from her mother. Jake made a choice that would change his life. Instead of following the others to safety, he ran toward the fallen princess. A Korthek soldier was already moving toward her, weapon raised. Jake tackled the alien warrior, using his human strength and combat training to knock the bigger creature down. "Princess! This way!" Jake grabbed the young Zephyrian's hand and pulled her to her feet. She looked around frantically for her mother. But the queen was already being rushed away by other guards toward a different exit. "My mother! Where is my mother?" The princess cried in accented English. "She is safe," Jake told her, though he was not sure if that was true. "I will get you back to her, I promise." More Korthek soldiers were coming. Jake knew they could not reach the main evacuation point now. He pulled the princess toward a service corridor he had learned about during his time at the palace. They crawled through narrow passages while the sounds of battle echoed around them. The princess was crying, her crystal skin flickering with fear. Jake had never felt so protective of another person in his life. Something about her youth and innocence made him determined to keep her safe. No matter what happened to him, they reached a maintenance exit that led to the city's lower levels. Jake could hear the evacuation ships taking off in the distance. He hoped the Queen was on one of them. But he and the princess were now alone in a city under attack, with enemy soldiers hunting for them. "What is your name?" the princess asked as they hid behind some damaged equipment. "Jake Morrison, United Earth Defense Corps," he replied. "And I'm going to keep you safe until I can get you back to your mother. That is a promise." The princess nodded, her purple eyes showing trust despite her fear. Jake realized he had just made a commitment that might cost him his life. But looking at the young alien who depended on him now, he knew he would do whatever it took to keep his word. Outside, the sounds of the Korthic victory grew louder. The Crystal City was falling. But Jake Morrison had found his real mission. He would protect Princess Lyra Veltar and reunite her with her mother, or die trying. 3 days had passed since the attack on the Crystal City. Jake and Princess Lyra were hiding in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of what used to be Veltara. The beautiful crystal spires were now broken stumps, and Korthic patrol ships flew overhead every few hours looking for survivors. Jake watched the princess sleep on a makeshift bed he had created from old shipping materials. Her crystal skin was dimmer than when he first met her, and he was worried. He had learned from his cultural briefings that Zephyrians needed specific atmospheric conditions to stay healthy. The air in the warehouse was too dry and did not have the right minerals that her people needed. "Princess," he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder, "we need to move." "I found some information about where your mother might be." Lyra opened her purple eyes slowly. She had been getting weaker each day, and Jake knew they could not stay hidden much longer. Through his communicator, he had managed to contact other resistance members who told him that the royal family had been taken to a prison facility called Darkhold, 300 miles away across enemy territory. "My mother is alive?" the princess asked, her voice like distant wind chimes. "Yes, she is alive," Jake said, though he was not completely sure. The resistance reports were not clear about which royal family members had survived. But he needed to give the princess hope. "We are going to find her." Jake had spent the last 3 days learning basic Zephyrian words and phrases. The princess spoke good English, but when she was scared or tired, she switched back to her own language. He wanted to understand her better and make her feel less alone. They packed their few supplies into Jake's military backpack. He had managed to salvage some food and water from the warehouse, but it would not last long. More importantly, he had found some old mining equipment that could help create better air for the princess. The Zephyrians had once mined crystals in this area, and their equipment was designed to produce the mineral-rich atmosphere their people needed. "Jake," the princess said as they prepared to leave, "why are you helping me? Your people could have left when the attack started." Jake stopped packing and looked at her. It was a good question. His orders had been to evacuate with the other humans when the situation became dangerous. No one would blame him for leaving. But when he saw her fall during the attack, something inside him made the choice before his mind could think about it. "Because you needed help," he said simply, "and because I made you a promise. Humans do not break promises to people we care about." The princess smiled for the first time since the attack. Her crystal skin brightened slightly, which made Jake feel better too. They left the warehouse before dawn, moving through the ruined streets like ghosts. Jake used his military training to avoid the Korthic patrols. The enemy soldiers were easy to spot because they made a lot of noise and used bright lights. They were not used to fighting people who did not want to be found. On the second day of their journey, they reached the edge of the city. The countryside beyond was scarred by the Korthic invasion. Burned forests stretched to the horizon, and the air smelled of smoke and death. Jake realized this would be much harder than hiding in the city. "We need transport," he told the princess as they crouched behind some rocks, watching a Korthic convoy pass on the main road. Walking 300 miles will take too long, and you are getting sicker. It was true. The princess could barely walk for more than an hour without resting. Her crystal skin was becoming cloudy, and she coughed frequently. Jake knew that humans could adapt to different environments, but Zephyrians were not built for survival in harsh conditions. That night, Jake made a dangerous decision. There was a Korthic supply depot 2 miles away, and he had seen atmospheric processors among their equipment. If he could steal one, it would help the princes breathe properly. It would also be incredibly risky. "Stay here," he told Lyra as he prepared his weapons. "Hide in these rocks and do not come out for anyone except me." "Jake, no!" The princess grabbed his arm. "It is too dangerous. I can manage without the machine." "You cannot manage," Jake said gently but firmly. "I have watched you getting weaker. If I do not get that equipment, you will die before we reach your mother. I cannot let that happen." The princess looked into his eyes and saw the determination. There, she had learned that humans were stubborn when they decided to protect someone. "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. I know Korthic equipment better than you do," she said, her voice growing stronger. "My people studied their technology for defensive purposes. You will need my help to make the atmospheric processor work." Jake realized she was right. He knew how to fight and how to sneak around, but he did not understand alien technology. "Okay, but you do exactly what I say when I say it." No arguments. They approached the supply depot after midnight. Jake had counted 12 Korthic guards, but most of them were focused on the perimeter. The equipment storage area was less heavily watched. They crawled through tall grass, moving slowly to avoid detection. Jake disabled 2 guards silently using techniques he had learned in military training. The princess watched with wide eyes, realizing for the first time how dangerous humans could be when protecting someone they cared about. "There?" she whispered, pointing to a machine that looked like a metal box with tubes coming out of it. "That is an atmospheric processor. But we also need power cells and mineral cartridges." They worked together quickly and quietly. The princess showed Jake which components they needed while he kept watch for more guards. When they had everything, they began the careful retreat back to their hiding place. That was when things went wrong. A Korthic patrol found the unconscious guards and raised the alarm. Bright searchlights swept across the area, and Jake could hear the enemy soldiers shouting in their harsh language. "Run," Jake told the princess, but she was already moving. They ran through the grass as energy beams flashed around them. Jake felt one beam pass so close to his head that it singed his hair. They reached their hiding place just as the Korthic search parties spread out across the area. Jake quickly set up the atmospheric processor while the princess connected the power cells. Within minutes, she was breathing easier as mineral-rich air flowed around their small hiding space. "You risked your life for this?" she said, her crystal skin beginning to glow more brightly. "Yes," Jake said, checking his weapons in case the Korthic found them. "That is what humans do for family." "Family?" the princess asked. Jake paused, realizing what he had said. "Yes, you are family now. I chose to protect you, so you are my responsibility. That makes us family." The princess smiled, and for the first time since the attack, her crystal skin shone with its full brightness. She was beginning to understand that this human soldier was not just keeping a promise. He genuinely cared about her as if she were his own sister or daughter. As the Korthic search parties moved away from their area, Jake began planning their next move. They had the equipment they needed now, but the journey ahead would still be dangerous. 300 miles of enemy territory lay between them and the prison where Queen Vera was being held, but looking at the princess, who was already looking healthier, Jake felt confident they could make it. Humans were good at impossible missions when they had something worth fighting for, and Princess Lyra Veltar was definitely worth fighting for. 2 weeks into their journey, Jake and Princess Lyra had covered nearly half the distance to Darkhold Prison. They traveled at night and hid during the day, moving through forests and abandoned settlements. The atmospheric processor had helped. The princess regained much of her strength, but Jake could see that their constant running was wearing on both of them. The Korthek had realized that Princess Lyra was not among the captured royals at Darkhold. Commander Vex Malachor, a brutal Korthek, general with scars covering his gray face, had issued orders to find her at any cost. Reward notices appeared in every occupied town, offering wealth to anyone who provided information about the missing princess and her. Human protector Dake learned about the manhunt when they stopped at a ruined village to search for supplies. Hidden behind collapsed buildings, he watched Korthik soldiers question the few remaining Zephyrian civilians. The enemy warriors were not gentle with their interrogations. "Have you seen a young female of royal blood traveling with a human soldier?" The lead Korthak demanded, his red eyes glowing with menace. An old Zephyrian man, his crystal skin cracked with age, shook his head. "We have seen no one, honored warrior. We are only trying to survive." The Korthik soldier struck the old man with his weapon, sending him to the ground. "Lies, we know they passed through this region. Speak truth or your village burns." Jake felt his hands tighten on his rifle. Every instinct told him to intervene, to protect the innocent civilians. But he also knew that revealing himself would doom the princess. He made the hardest choice a soldier could make. He stayed hidden and watched good people suffer. Princess Lyra crouched beside him, tears flowing down her crystal cheeks as she watched her people being terrorized. "We have to help them," she whispered. "We cannot," Jake replied, though the words felt like poison in his mouth. "If we fight now, we will be captured or killed. Then we can never reach your mother, and these people will have suffered for nothing." The princess understood, but Jake could see the guilt in her purple eyes. She felt responsible for the pain her people were enduring because of her escape. After the Korthik patrol left the village, Jake and Lyra approached the injured civilians. The old man who had been struck was badly hurt, silver blood seeping from a head wound. Without hesitation, Princess Lyra placed her hands on his injuries. Jake watched in amazement as the princess's crystal skin began to glow with soft light. The old man's wounds closed and healed completely within minutes. This was the first time Jake had seen Zephyrian healing abilities in action, and he began to understand why the Korthek wanted to capture the royal family so desperately. "You are Princess Lyra," the old man whispered in recognition. "You should not be here. It is too dangerous." "We are traveling to find my mother," the princess explained. "Can you help us?" The old man nodded slowly. "There is an underground network helping people escape Korthik occupation. We call ourselves the Crystal Path. I can put you in contact with others who will help you reach Darkhold." Over the next few days, Jake learned about the resistance movement that had formed among both Zephyrian civilians and the few remaining human personnel scattered across the planet. The Crystal Path provided safe houses, information about Korthik movements, and supplies for people trying to escape occupied territory. At a hidden camp in the mountains, Jake met other humans who had chosen to stay and fight instead of evacuating. Lieutenant Tony Chun, a combat engineer, had been working with Zephyrian resistance fighters to sabotage Korthik supply lines. Sergeant Lisa Grant, a medic, was treating wounded civilians and fighters. "Morrison," Tony said when he learned Jake's identity. "Command declared you missing in action 2 weeks ago." "They think you are dead?" "Good," Jake replied. "Let them think that. It makes my job easier." "What job?" Lisa asked. "You are not under orders anymore. You could evacuate with the next transport." Jake looked over at Princess Lyra, who was sharing her healing abilities with wounded resistance fighters. "My job is getting her back to her mother. Everything else can wait." Tony and Lisa exchanged glances. They had both heard stories about the human soldier who had saved the Zephyrian princess, but seeing Jake's dedication in person was something different. This was not about following orders or military duty anymore. This was personal. "The Korthek have tripled their patrols in the region around Darkhold," Tony warned. "They know you are coming. Commander Malachor has placed his best hunters on your trail. Then we go around them," Jake said simply. "It is not that easy," Lisa added. "The direct route is completely blocked now. You would have to travel through the burning wastes, and no one survives that journey. The environment is too harsh even for humans." Jake studied the maps they showed him. The burning wastes were a desert region where chemical weapons had been used during an ancient war. The ground was poisoned, the air was toxic, and the temperature extremes could kill within hours. It was exactly the kind of place the Korthik would not expect anyone to travel through. We can make it, Jake decided. I will need environmental suits and extra power cells for the atmospheric processor. Jake, Princess Lyra had approached quietly and overheard the conversation. You cannot ask this of yourself. The burning wastes will kill us both. Maybe, Jake admitted, but the alternative is certain capture. At least this way we have a chance. At night, as they prepared for the most dangerous part of their journey, Princess Lyra asked Jake a question that had been troubling her. Why do humans do this? Why do you risk everything for people you barely know? Jake thought about it for a long time before answering. I think it is because we understand what it means to be alone and afraid. Humans have been through dark times in our history. We know what it feels like when no one comes to help. So when we see someone who needs protection, we cannot walk away, even if it costs your life? Especially then, Jake said, because some things are more important than staying alive. Keeping promises is one of them. Protecting family is another. I am not really your family, the princess said quietly. Jake looked at her with serious eyes. Yes, you are. I chose you, and you chose to trust me. That makes us family in the way. That matters most. The next morning, they said goodbye to the resistance fighters and began the journey into the burning wastes. Jake wore a heavy environmental suit that made him look like a walking tank. Princess Lyra's atmospheric processor had been modified to filter the toxic air of the wasteland. As they walked into the poisoned desert, Jake knew this would be their greatest test. The Korthak hunters were behind them, the toxic environment surrounded them, and the prison fortress of Darkhold waited ahead. But he also knew something else. He would not give up. He had made a promise to a scared young princess in a burning palace, and he intended to keep it. Princess Lyra followed close behind him, her crystal skin dim but determined. She had learned to trust this strange human who had risked everything to protect her. If Jake Morrison said they could cross the burning wastes, then they would cross the burning wastes. Together, they walked into the poisoned desert, two unlikely companions united by a promise that nothing could break. The burning wastes lived up to their terrible reputation. Jake and Princess Lyra had been crossing the poisoned desert for 5 days, and both were near the end of their strength. The environmental suits protected them from the toxic air, but the extreme temperatures and harsh terrain were taking their toll. During the day, the desert was hot enough to cook meat on the rocks. At night, the temperature dropped so low that even Jake's military-grade heating system struggled to keep them warm. The princess's atmospheric processor worked constantly, but Jake could see her crystal skin growing dimmer each day. How much further? Lyra asked through the communication system in her helmet. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. Jake checked his navigation device. 20 miles to the edge of the wasteland, then another 30 to Darkhold prison. They had been surviving on emergency rations and recycled water from their suits. Jake had given most of his food to the princess, telling her that humans needed less nutrition than Zephyrians. It was not true, but he would rather starve than watch her fade away. On the 6th day, disaster struck. A sandstorm filled with toxic particles caught them in the open desert. The storm was so violent that Jake could not see more than a few feet in any direction. He grabbed Princess Lyra's hand and pulled her toward what looked like a rock formation. That might provide shelter. They found a small cave, but the storm damaged Lyra's atmospheric processor. The machine sparked and died, leaving her breathing the filtered air from her helmet reserves. Jake calculated quickly. She had maybe 6 hours of clean air left. Jake, the princess said, her voice calm despite their desperate situation. You need to leave me here and continue to Darkhold alone. No, Jake replied immediately. We have been through this before. I do not leave family behind. I am dying anyway, Lyra said. My people cannot survive long without proper atmospheric conditions. But you could still reach my mother. You could tell her what happened to me. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he began taking apart his own atmospheric system. What are you doing? The princess asked. I am going to connect my system to yours, Jake explained as he worked with the mechanical components. Humans can adapt to different air conditions better than Zephyrians. I will share my clean air with you. That will kill you, Lyra protested. Maybe, Jake said, not stopping his work. But maybe not. Humans are tough. We survive things that should kill us all the time. Within an hour, Jake had jury-rigged a system that would split his clean air supply between both of them. It meant they would both have less oxygen, but the princess would have the mineral-rich atmosphere she needed to survive. Jake would have to deal with breathing partially toxic air. As they prepared to leave the cave shelter, Jake began to feel the effects of the poisoned air. His throat burned, his eyes watered, and his head pounded with pain. But he kept walking. He had made too many promises to give up now. The princess walked beside him, her crystal skin beginning to glow more brightly as she breathed the clean air. But she could see what the sacrifice was costing Jake. The human soldier was poisoning himself to keep her alive. Jake, please, she said. Take back your clean air. I cannot watch you die for me. Not happening, Jake replied, though his voice was hoarse from the toxic air. We are almost out of this wasteland. A few more hours and we will both be fine. They reached the edge of the burning waste just as Jake collapsed. The days of breathing poisoned air had finally overwhelmed even his human endurance. He fell to his knees, coughing up blood, his body shaking from the toxins in his system. Princess Lyra immediately disconnected her clean air supply and tried to give it back to Jake, but he pushed her hands away. Keep it, he gasped. You need it more than I do. No, the princess said firmly. My turn to help you. She placed her hands on Jake's chest and began to glow with healing light. Jake felt the burning in his lungs ease as her Zephyrian abilities worked to neutralize the poison in his body. It took all of her remaining strength, but she managed to heal the worst of the damage. Why did you do that? Jake asked when he could breathe normally again. You used too much energy. Now you are weaker than before. Because that is what family does, Lyra replied, using Jake's own words. We protect each other. Jake smiled despite their desperate situation. The princess had learned well from their time together. She was no longer the frightened child he had rescued from the burning palace. She had become someone who would risk her own life to save others. They made camp at an oasis just outside the wasteland and contacted the resistance network. The news they received was both good and bad. Queen Vera was confirmed to be alive, and I am PRISONED at Darkhold, but the facility was more heavily guarded than ever. Commander Malachar had stationed his elite troops there, expecting Jake and the princess to attempt a rescue. You need more help, the resistance contact told them through the secure communication channel. Darkhold is a fortress. 2 people cannot break in alone. Then get me more people, Jake said. The nearest resistance cell is 3 days away. By the time they reach you, the Korthik may have moved the queen to a different location. Jake studied the intelligence reports about Darkhold. Prison. The facility was built into a mountain, with only one main entrance and walls that could withstand heavy weapons. Inside, there were hundreds of Korthik soldiers and automated defense systems. Any rational military analysis would conclude that an assault was impossible, but Jake had stopped thinking rationally weeks ago. He was thinking like a human who had made a promise to a young girl, and humans did not break promises just because the odds were bad. We go tomorrow night, he decided. During the shift change at midnight, the guards will be distracted for exactly 7 minutes. Jake, Princess Lyra said quietly, this is suicide. You know that, right? Probably, Jake agreed. But your mother is in there, and I promise to reunite you with her. I keep my promises. The princess looked at this human who had already given up so much for her. He had left his military unit, crossed enemy territory, survived the burning wastes, and poisoned himself to keep her alive. Now he was planning to assault an impregnable fortress because he had made a promise to a frightened child. If we do this, we do it together, she said. No more protecting me while you take all the risks. We are family, remember? Family fights together. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her purple eyes. Princess Lyra Veltar was no longer someone who needed constant protection. She had become a warrior in her own right, someone who would stand beside him in the final battle. All right, Jake said, together then. But when we find your mother, the first thing you say to her is that you are safe. Make sure she knows that you are safe. I will, the princess promised. And I will make sure she knows who kept me safe. As they prepared for what might be their final mission, both Jake and Princess Lyra understood that they had changed during their long journey together. He was no longer just a soldier following orders, and she was no longer just a princess waiting to be rescued. They had become something more, a family forged by shared danger and mutual sacrifice. Tomorrow they would attempt the impossible. Tonight they rested and prepared for the battle that would either reunite a mother and daughter, or end their story forever. But regardless of what happened, they would face it together, as family should. The attack on Darkhold Prison began at exactly midnight. Jake and Princess Lyra crouched in the shadows outside the fortress walls, watching the Korthik guards change shifts. Jake had spent hours studying the patrol patterns through his binoculars, timing every movement down to the second. 7 minutes, he whispered to the princess. That is all the time we have before they realize something is wrong. Lyra nodded, her crystal skin dimmed to avoid detection. Over the past month, she had learned to control her natural glow, making herself nearly invisible in the darkness. The frightened child who had hidden behind palace walls was gone, replaced by someone ready to fight for her family. Jake had contacted the Resistance Network one final time before the assault. Lieutenant Tony Chun and Sergeant Lisa Grant were leading a diversionary attack on the other side of the mountain to draw away some of the guards. It was not much help, but every distraction counted when facing impossible odds. They scaled the fortress wall using climbing equipment Jake had salvaged from his military gear. The princess proved surprisingly agile, her Zephyrian physiology allowing her to move with grace, even in the heavy infiltration suit Jake had found for her at the top of the wall. They could see into the prison compound. Searchlights swept back and forth across the courtyard, and guard towers monitored every approach. But Jake had found a blind spot in the surveillance pattern, a narrow corridor between two buildings that was only visible for 3 seconds during each sweep. There, Jake pointed to a service entrance. That leads to the lower levels where they keep the high-value prisoners. They dropped into the courtyard and ran for the service door. Jake had learned basic Korthik security protocols during his military training, and he managed to bypass the electronic lock with a device he had built from scavenged parts. Inside the fortress, the corridors were dark and filled with the harsh breathing sounds of sleeping Korthik soldiers. Jake led the way using night vision equipment, while Princess Lyra followed silently behind him. They moved like ghosts through the enemy stronghold. The lower levels of Darkhold were a maze of prison cells carved directly into the mountain rock. Jake could hear the sounds of suffering echoing from behind steel doors, moans of pain, whispered prayers, and the occasional scream. The Korthik were not kind to their prisoners. "My mother," Princess Lyra whispered, her voice breaking. "She is somewhere in this terrible place." Jake checked his stolen map of the facility. High-value prisoners are kept in the maximum security section, this way. They descended deeper into the mountain until they reached a corridor lined with heavily reinforced cells. Each door had a small window, and Jake began checking them one by one. Most contained Zephyrian nobles and officials who had been captured during the invasion. Then he found her queen. Vera Veltar sat in the corner of a cell that was barely large enough for a human, let alone royalty. Her once bright crystal skin was dim and cracked, her royal robes torn and stained with silver blood. Korthik scientists had been experimenting on her, trying to extract the genetic secrets of Zephyrian healing abilities. "Your Majesty," Jake whispered through the door slot. The queen looked up with eyes that had seen too much suffering. When she recognized Jake's human features, hope flickered in her purple gaze. "Sergeant Morrison? But you were reported dead." "Reports," of my death were greatly exaggerated, Jake said as he worked to override the cell door lock. I brought someone to see you. Princess Lyra stepped into view, and Queen Vera's crystal skin began to glow with joy despite her weakness. Lyra, my daughter? How is this possible? Jake kept his promise, the princess said, tears flowing down her cheeks. He brought me back to you. The cell door opened with a soft hiss, and mother and daughter rushed into each other's arms. Jake watched the reunion he had fought so hard to make possible, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any military victory he had ever achieved. I am safe, Mom, Princess Lyra whispered, holding her mother tight. Thanks to him. Queen Vera looked over her daughter's shoulder at the human soldier who had risked everything to keep a promise made in a burning palace. Sergeant Morrison, how can my people ever repay such loyalty? Just take care of your daughter, Your Majesty, Jake replied. That is payment enough. The moment was interrupted by the sound of alarms echoing through the fortress. The diversionary attack had been